Hi, what you're about to see is an interview with a vendor in the space in and around data mesh. We'd like to thank Nick Heudecker for graciously doing these interviews with vendors. We'd also like to make it clear that the data mesh community and data mesh learning doesn't necessarily endorse anything that these vendors are talking about, but that we wanted to give them a voice to talk about what they may offer in the space, so people are aware of vendors, because obviously if everybody has to build everything themselves, the data mesh is going to be pretty hard. So with that, we really thank Nick for doing this great work, and we hope that this is good and useful to you.
All right, welcome to another data mesh learning vendor interview. My name is Nick Heudecker, former Gartner analyst, currently senior director of market strategy and competitive intelligence at Cribl, the observability pipeline company. If you want to know more about Cribl, you can check out these two links up here. And today I'm joined by Nong Li, the CTO of Okera. Nong, please introduce yourself.
Hi, it's great to be here. Yeah, my name is Nong. I'm one of the founders and CTO of Okera. My background's on the data platform side, building at the house. I was previously at Okera and Databricks, and really saw enterprises try to adopt some of these new data infrastructure for the first time, and the set of challenges that they ran into. At Okera, we're focused on universal data authorization, meaning we have these large, complex data platforms, data meshes, and we're trying to help organizations be able to manage policies, access rights, understanding the usage of these platforms at scale so they can accelerate their data initiatives.
And we've also got Sanjeev Mohan on. Sanjeev, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Sanjeev. Nick and I used to be colleagues and peers at Gartner not too long ago, and I am now independent. I'm a principal with my own firm called SanjMo. I research the data management, data and analytics space quite a bit, and recently I've written quite a bit about data mesh, how it requires a universal authorization layer, and I'm happy to be on this show.
Great. All right, so let's get into it. So Nong, maybe you can start by telling us about the company. When was it founded? What kind of funding do you have? Things like that.
Yeah, so we started the company just about 5.5 years ago. And 5.5, it feels very, very different from today because things are moving so fast, right? I think big enterprises were just starting to use the cloud in earnest, and there's just so much has changed in the time since. We really made a few observations from our prior experience, right? It would be that data technology and architecture would continue to expand, right? We're going to see more and more vendors and technologies. I think the data mesh principles very much align with that continued ecosystem and the heterogeneity that we see there. We saw sort of that there would be way more interest in issues around data privacy and data security. GDPR was not a thing at the time, 5.5 years ago. So those are kind of some of the principles that we've had the company on. We've been focusing on helping very large enterprises. Our clients are sort of the Fortune 100 companies like that who really have this diverse problem and a ton of a big data user base. So that's kind of how we think about it. We're sort of VC backed. We've raised a few rounds of institutional funding. We're backed primarily by Bessemer and ClearSky, which really represent how we think about the world, right? Both on the data infrastructure side as well as the security side. And I think that combination is where we sit in play.
Are you guys remote first, remote only? How does that work?
Yeah, so we've always had a remote development setup by having sort of a primary office in SF in Seattle. And this has been true at the company since the very early days, well before COVID and all of these kind of things. So that's kind of given us some of that muscle on learning how to work remote and so on and so forth. So today, I would say there's still kind of critical mass in both of those. A lot of our field and go-to-market is on the East Coast, as expected. And certainly over the last couple of years, people have been free to work where they choose. And we certainly look for people to join the company who live all over. So I would say getting to maybe remote first.
Got it. No, good to know. All right. So I will admit that I'm not as familiar with Okera as I probably should be. So maybe you can give me an intro. Where does your product fit? What kind of problem does it solve?
Yeah, so the primary problem we solve is what we call universal data authorization, meaning you as an organization have data in a whole bunch of places. You need to get it to end users and applications, and you want consistent policy management, right? Consistent authorization. So you want to be able to say that, this is how we think about GDPR and data privacy. And I want to be able to create a rule that enforces and governs that policy across my entire data estate. And different parts of the company for different data and use cases may have different rules, but I want to be able to enforce that consistently. So really that breaks down into three of our key product pillars. So the first is around policy authoring and policy management. We want to make this not something that requires DBA expertise, that is fundamentally much more scalable. So we're not creating thousands and thousands of rules. We can create tens of rules, right, from the work we've done there. The second pillar is around enforcement. So, I think in the context of data mesh in particular, data is stored and accessed from such a different variety of tools, right? And they have very different behavior and capabilities. So getting consistent policy enforcement, right? I'm always going to mass data the same way. I'm always going to filter it no matter how I'm looking at it. That's sort of the second pillar. And then the last pillar is really around insights and observability, right? So what we often see in these big platforms is you might have tens or hundreds of petabytes, but it's hard for you to know which teams are accessing which, how they're being used, those kind of problems. And I think that's the third leg of the stool, and that's what we do.
What kind of data sources are we talking about here? I mean, I would imagine traditional databases, some NoSQL databases, or non-relational, I guess is the term of art now. But you mentioned observability, right? We're in Cribl's in the observability data space, right? So we see different data stores like Splunk, Elastic, things like that. Are you spanning those types of data stores as well?
Yeah, we have been and can be very much focused on the analytics side of the use cases. So meaning stores that are predominantly used for data warehousing, scale out storage, kind of more that big data side of use cases, and a little bit of ML and things like that. Not so much on the more operational ones, like say Splunk or things like that.
Okay, so from the data mesh side, you guys are really focused on the governance piece, the consistency and management type of area, as well as kind of, and I would guess there's some extensions here into a bit of the data product story, right? Providing a more consistent experience for data products. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, but I think the governance side of problems really extends into the other areas naturally, right? So I think part of what we think about for governance is a concept we've been talking about called distributed stewardship, right? Meaning that it's no longer central IT or a single organization that's responsible for policies everywhere. We want to push that down in product teams, lines of businesses, so on and so forth. And that's traditionally been a challenge because the systems are hard to administer. They require sort of admin permissions and so on and so forth. That force it down to relatively small number of people who are able to do it. So we want to break that up, which I think is one of the data mesh principles, right? Kind of that distributed governance model. So we do a little bit of that. And then we increasingly work with companies that say, oh, we want data as a product, right? We want to sell this data to other people, or it's so core to the capability of the product offering, and we know we need to build access control into it. We don't want to build it on our own native to the product. That's kind of a waste of time. So we see sort of extending into those kind of capabilities as well.
So I think people buy a lot of tools, right? And I think that they don't necessarily use a lot of the tools that they buy. So who are you talking to? Who recognizes that this is a problem in their data estate and then seeks you out? Like, is this a chief data officer role that's saying, I need that, this is the problem I need to solve? Is it some other type of stewardship role? Because I feel like people would recognize they have this problem and they would go buy something to go solve it if they're in that role. But then deploying it becomes kind of I guess the second phase of my question, right? It's nice to have, but how do you actually deploy it and get people to use it?
Yeah.
So first question is, I guess, who's your buyer?
Yeah, so our primary buyer is the infrastructure team. So CIO, VP of Engineering, VP of Infrastructure, that kind of persona. Now, the other stakeholders like CDO and security obviously contribute to the process, but that's the buyer. And we're really helping them with kind of two challenges at the same time, right? So the first is they get all these requests from their internal customers who say, we need to be able to implement security easier, or very common for us might be my data science team, extremely well paid, takes them months to get access to data. This is a waste of time and money. They're frustrated. Go make this happen in hours, right? So that kind of helping them with their requirements and being able to meet them much easier. And then the second thing we help them with is these teams invest a ton of resources into data mesh or data platform building, right? They acquire a bunch of products, as you said, and kind of, again, sort of in line with the genesis of the company, what we see is adoption of these platforms gets blocked or dramatically slowed down because governance is not there, right? It's very easy to onboard the first 10 power users that can do whatever they want, but getting to the next 100, you need a different way of doing things. Getting to the next 1,000, you need to do different things. So for them, it's really helping them with the ROI story of their, all these investments they've made in these tools to get more user adoption. But that kind of central IT infrastructure person is typically our buyer.
And maybe this is also a question for Sanjeev as well. Getting access to data sources, it's often like a personal decision for somebody within an organization. Like, nope, that's my data. That's how I define my role in a company. I don't want to give anyone else access to it. So do you see that kind of resistance for some of your customers or prospects? Like they have the product, they have the capability to better control, better govern that access, but it's still very much a people problem of, well, will they actually be allowed to get, even though the tools are there, can they still touch that data?
So if I take a swag at this, I don't see this behavior as prevalent as it used to be a few years ago.
Okay.
I think our data culture and data literacy has advanced to a point where every constituent within an organization realizes that they have a single unified goal, which is to meet the business imperative, wherever the strategy is. And so they're coming together. So this old notion of this is my domain, my silo, and I protect it is old school. And I see it's just not tenable in these very complex architectures that we are building these days.
I think it's good feedback. I'm starting to see that wane as well, but it's always an interesting question. I think more technology forward companies, I think they're getting over that. Perhaps more traditional, more legacy companies, type C companies. I think you still might see a little bit of that behavior. No, good. I think it's a great point. So Nong, on your side, I mean, when you start to see like companies coming to you, what's the average data infrastructure story for them? Like what do you see as like a baseline most of the time?
Sure. So I would say we work with a lot of companies. I mean, I think everybody has some amount of hybrid and cloud still today, right? Kind of maybe looking at the cloud native technologies. So we, on the cloud side, which is where we obviously see a lot of investment and activity, the baseline looks like some amount of scale out storage system. So S3, ADLS, GS, on the different cloud vendors, right? That kind of scale out lake. And some data warehousing, cloud native data warehousing product, right? So Snowflake, obviously, we see a ton of that, Redshift, Synapse, BigQuery, et cetera. And that is the core infrastructure that, by volume, by user, so on and so forth. Different companies will sort of draw the line between those two differently, right? Some do sort of down the middle, half S3, half Snowflake, and some are more on one side or the other. So that's really the core of it. Now, on the tools that talk to it, that's everything you can imagine, right? That
right.
Has basically infinite variety. So, and then we see a whole bunch of them kind of the traditional database that they still need to talk to that contains some state, right? Your Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, things like that. So that captures it. And then maybe in the longer bit, we see some companies that are using, like DynamoDB and the key value stores, NoSQL, a little bit of Kafka, Elasticsearch, things like that. But that's smaller from what we see.
How does the product work? It sounds like it has a bit of like a data virtualization story to it.
Yeah, it has a little bit of that. So I would say some of the things that we've been learning and developing over the years is that we feel the right way to do the enforcement portion of it. There is no one size fits all, right? There's tremendous variety and capability in the data ecosystem. So you need different enforcement patterns to be able to support different ones. One of them does look a little bit like data virtualization, meaning that we're making the systems that we protect look the same, not just from a policy management point of view, but from an access and an API and so on and so forth. So that's kind of one set of things. But for many other components, say, for example, everything that has a Hadoop heritage, so anything Spark, Presto, etc., there I wouldn't really think of it as virtualization, right? Those systems are extensible by design. So we plug into those via their natural mechanisms, but then end users connect to those systems directly. So Databricks is an example where we're integrated, and if you're an end user, you log into the notebook, can't tell the difference, all good. There's no sort of virtualization of any kind there. And then we have some other patterns for different systems that leverage their native capabilities and so on. So our overall goal is that end users shouldn't know we exist, right? Authorization should be transparent, and we want to preserve the native behavior to the best possible. But yeah, a little bit of that looks like virtualization, but that's actually relatively minor compared to the other ways that we enforce.
So you talk about access control, like via tools, things like that. A big, I would say, a core part of a data mesh is this notion of a data product. How does Okera help with kind of governing product creation, product consumption?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a few different ways we help, and we have different customer examples that do that. So I think we see, and I'm sure you do too, kind of increasingly products that are so data centric, right? The data aspect that they give is really kind of the core of the product. We see this in a lot of our customers that have HR style use cases, right? They want to expose HR data for the entire organization, right? You can imagine managers want to be able to see what's in their reporting team, and individuals should be able to see things about themselves. So that's a very common product we see companies build in-house or leveraging different kind of things. And as we think about, I would imagine if you are today building a product that touches people data, you have to be thinking about privacy, right? It would just seem crazy to not be cognizant of GDPR or CCPA or these kind of things. Even if you're not trying to implement one rule in particular, I think you're going to care about this, and you probably also care about this as a sort of product differentiation, right?
Well, and you're likely to care about it as like an ESG issue as well, increasingly.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Top of mind for a lot of boards today.
Yeah, so we help companies, when they think about it the way we do. So those products don't have to build this part, right? They can just leverage our system, our APIs, our capabilities, and then get this sort of arbitrary user granularity controls for the data that they're serving just by using our capabilities.
So if I may ask,
Sure.
if I may add, Nick, so the way Okera comes in the picture is that the domain owners will create their data products. So the data product could be serve HR data, let's say, but then they are also responsible for creating, in this distributed stewardship, the policy that goes with that data product. Now, where Okera comes in is, let's say I log in and I want to invoke that data product and see the value, then the policy will read my authorizations. So what role, what group I belong in, where am I dialing in from, and it'll dynamically show me the results based on the authorizations I have. When you log in, you may see a different result. So instead of creating a separate role for you, for me, for Nong, and for everybody else, it's the same policy, but using attribute-based access control, it is showing me data that only I'm authorized to see. So if I move to, let's say, Germany, now all of a sudden I'm under GDPR, so I will not see the US data. So it'll do that, the row level filtering, the column level filtering automatically, dynamically based on the attributes.
I understand that. That also sounds like it could be somewhat frustrating, right? If you've got two people that are working together, maybe they're in the same office, and one person has rights to see some things and not others. And like say you, Sanjeev, you and I are sitting next to each other and you have more rights than I do. It may be frustrating for me to see that, well, you've got access to much more data. I mean, is that something that has happened?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were talking a little bit earlier that, there is a sort of people and process aspect of this, and that's for sure, right? There's no doubt that that's true. That particular story, I haven't heard. I definitely have heard in the past where data provisioning is too hard, right? Getting access is too hard, and Sanjeev has access. I'm going to say, Sanjeev, can you go make me a CSV copy of this so I get my job done, rather than wait many months of process. So that one we heard quite a bit, and we can sort of see evidence of that if we look at a large data platform. But yeah, I mean, I think I think we're still learning the right set of behaviors that govern this correctly. But I think having the right tools that are easy is kind of the path forward.
Yeah, simply having the ability to do it. You can solve the other problems later with training. I certainly understand that. Are there any like specific customer stories you might want to share, whether it's trends that you've seen within a given industry or a specific customer that jumps to mind for you?
Yeah, I think in sort of the topics that we've been covering, this is a large pharmaceutical company that we work with, and it's really fascinating just how they approach the problem, right? So for them, their company is divided into very many top-level domains that are really, really different, right? They're in pharmaceuticals, so there's a division that looks like just pure R&D research. There is manufacturing and supply chain. There is commercial and go-to-market and those kind of things. And then there's HR. I think I'm forgetting one of them. But all of those disciplines are just completely different, right? And as we think about sort of large companies that manufacture things or do those kind of things, it makes sense, right? They're going to have some different things that are very different. And nevertheless, they very much want shared technology platform, right? So the same kind of tools that can be used across all of those very, very different use cases and domains, but give them all the autonomy to control what that means, right? You can imagine like PII in clinical research data just means something different than in manufacturing data, right? Even if it's email address or the exact same content or type of content. So, we did a lot of the early sort of design work with them on distributed stewardship. How do we provide the tooling that lets them govern something that is sort of as diverse as their set of business domains? And that's really cool to see. Yeah, how kind of forward thinking they were on this.
That's good. It's a good story. Well, for that specific example, how long was the deployment cycle?
Yeah.
Round numbers are fine.
Yeah, I would say a low number of months.
Okay. Okay. But that's pretty fast adoption.
Yeah, and it's not, you don't go from there to full adoption in that period of time, right? We certainly encourage people to start with the first use case. That's the most important. Get familiar, get some internal, we'll join and figure out best practices, and then roll it out to more and more first one takes probably the most amount of time typically, and then you can roll on, dozens upon dozens and very easily.
Got it. Where is the product available? Is it, I mean, you mentioned cloud, right? You can't not mention cloud, right? But so certainly available cloud. What about on-prem? Is it also available on an on-prem footprint?
Yeah, so it's always been, so we support all the three major cloud vendors, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, as well as on-premise. We have sort of a Kubernetes-based architecture, which gives us that flexibility to deploy in a few different places. That sort of ability to deploy hybrid in particular, sort of on-prem and cloud, our customers leverage for various migration style use cases, right? Being able to simultaneously stand up both with shared policy can really help them speed things up.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
No, I think we covered good ground. Anything on your mind, Sanjeev?
Yeah. I want to, Sanjeev, before you jump in here, actually, I want to say this. So we're recording this in early December, right? So it's like predictions and trends season. So I'm going to put you guys both on the spot. Sanjeev, I'm going to go with you first because I know you're always thinking about this. Sanjeev lives in the future. And then Nong, I'll give you a second to think of something. Sanjeev, where's data mesh going in 2022? What do you think?
So, great question, very controversial. I've written how data mesh concepts are fantastic, the right thing to do. What we've been missing are the implementation aspects to it. With the work Okera is doing, and some of the companies are starting to do, like JPMC has a deployment. A few other companies, Flexport is another one. Advinter, we are getting there, and I think we will see data mesh take off in 2022. That's my prediction.
All right, Nong, what do you think? What's going to happen? What are we looking at next year?
Yeah, I think we covered it a little bit, but I think we're going to see emerging products. So startups and all of these kind of things, where data privacy is a front and center differentiating feature. We see that, for example, in Apple products, where they talk about that quite a bit, and I think we're going to see that in more and more emerging products in the coming year.
That's an interesting point. We're seeing kind of like the post-cookie future. When it comes to marketing, I think that's an interesting extension of it. It's kind of a double down on privacy. No, good stuff. Sanjeev, you were going to make one additional comment there, and I jumped in the way. Go for it.
Yeah, so I was just saying that another use case, and Nong, it'll be great if you can maybe mention it in a few minutes, is where these products, universal access authorization, are being used literally at petabyte scale data, and that's a public use case. Nong, I don't know if you want to jump in and maybe take a minute to talk about it.
Sure. Are you referencing FINRA?
Yes, FINRA.
Yeah. So FINRA is one of our clients, and they have a really, really awesome use case. They spoke about their use of Okera, so it is public, and I think it's somewhat well known that they are a very, very large AWS consumer, right? They've been using it from the early days.
Very much so. Yeah, very large AWS consumer.
They're one of the poster child. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they build a lot of their own tech. They're actually a customer of Cribl's as well.
Yeah. So it is massive infrastructure, incredibly awesome use case. And for them, right, it's really all about the data and how much insight and analytics and telemetry can they get, subject to some very strict rules, right? So that's really the balance that we see a lot of companies struggle with. How do I give people more access to more of the right stuff without giving them too much of the other stuff? So their data platform is just absolutely massive. It gets more and more massive every day as they collect more sets of things, so that they can do better case analysis and find the things that they're looking for easier, right? So you can imagine you investigating a particular thing should be able to see everything associated with it, right? That's the data volume and variety, but you shouldn't be able to see it for other cases or other things that they're investigating. So really that combination of being able to access exactly what you need to, and increasingly more, that's what you should be able to access should increase, but being able to control it effectively, very awesome. And then the scale and throughput requirements are just insane. They're doing incredible things.
Yeah.
You could even
So-
see how this would apply at, say, the intelligence community as well with their data volumes and complexity of analysis.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so just the point here is that in the past, a lot of these organizations, large, sophisticated organizations, did DIY, but now especially with data mesh and the decentralized, you just cannot afford to keep building these things in-house. You need like a platform that's already built and can handle it. So that's another thing I'm seeing that's changing from being DIY in-house build to moving to a more robust platform.
Definitely. I think that shift from artisanal solution to industrial
correct.
solution is definitely
Right.
something we need to see more of. We're seeing it in the observability space as well.
Great.
Gentlemen, this has been great. So Sanjeev, if folks want to find you and work with you, where can they find you online?
www.sanjmo.com.
All right. And Nong, where can folks find out more about Okera?
Yeah, so you can certainly go to our website, okera.com, or email me. I'm just Nong at okera.com.
Perfect. All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.